Que sopa, que sopa. Estoy aquí con el señor, el profesor, ¿cómo se dice? El master storyteller, Javier Wallace.
Así es.
And today I want to speak about the intersection of entrepreneurship and in the diaspora. This is something that I'm interested in personally, and I feel like a lot of my friends, a lot of the people that I interact with are interested in this topic as well. Me being, Afro-Panamanian, but growing up here in the United States, I've always seen my future in both countries, particularly as it involves business, but also culturally as well. And so, I just wanted to speak on that today. And I'll let Javier introduce himself.
Hey, wow. Hey, Anthony, thank you for having me. It's very lovely to be here. Gracias por la introducción, muy buenísima. Bien agradecido estoy yo por la introducción. Like I said, just glad to be here. Glad to be invited to be here. It's always good to talk about the things that we're doing collectively as a people to make sure when we think about diaspora and talking about being connected to different places and showing how that connectivity works. And I'm just glad to be featured here again. Javier Wallace, born and raised in Austin, Texas, if anybody's ever interested to know that, to an African American mother and a black Panamanian father. Grew up here in the city of Austin, graduated from Florida A&M University, Black College in Tallahassee, Florida, on the highest of 7 hills, one of the best institutions in this nation, and most definitely one of the top historically black colleges and universities in the world, I might add. Then moved to the Republic of Panama, where my dad is from. I lived there for I don't even know how many years at this point in time, because I feel like I haven't left in many cases, but I know I started that journey in 2012, and I'm pretty sure we're going to dive into some of the things that I did while there. Returned to Austin in 2017 to begin, and now have completed my PhD at the University of Texas at Austin. Thank you very much. And moving on to the next thing in life, the next stage, while continuing to run a couple of what we call social entrepreneurship ventures. Black Austin Tours is what I work on, and Afrolatinx travel. And I have my hand in a couple of other different projects as well too. So glad to be here. Hope that was enough to share with everybody to at least get the top of what we're doing.
To get us started, for sure. Yeah, so, you kind of touched on it, but I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about your journey in entrepreneurship. I remember one of the first few times I learned that you were involved in entrepreneurship was with Black Packers, which I just love the name, by the way. Like, I've always liked that name. So, I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about that.
Yes, most definitely. So my journey with entrepreneurship, I really don't even know where it starts. I like to think that on this journey, I would say I credit my grandfather, my African American grandfather, Leonard Hill, who owned his own barbershop. He opened it in 1948 here in Austin, in East Austin, and segregated East Austin. Even though he passed away in 2001, it's still under the stewardship of my family, and I was so glad to always have that connection to entrepreneurship. And it took me a while to get into it, but I've always thought about like how to make a little bit of bread or money here and there. But maybe the first journey, or we can really start with Black Packers. Black Packers, it came from living in Panama with I was there, I don't even know how many years, maybe 3 years. I lived in Panama, and I met up with my homeboy who I met in Panama, who was from Texas. A black college graduate as well, black man who was living in Panama just because that was something he wanted to do. And the reason why we call it Black Packers is because we were like getting into this whole backpacking scene. And backpacking had really been constructed, and I think still is constructed in the mainstream to be like a very white phenomenon, something that white people do, white young people do, and then there's like
like whenever I think of backpacking, I always think of, this is just me personally, like I always think of a white guy with long hair that's somewhere in like Eastern Europe or something, right? And so you're kind of addressing that with Black Packers, right?
Yeah, that's what we were trying to do. Like we are trying to say that there's not one specific way to be a backpacker or to travel on a budget or to do things off the beaten path, what people say. And we, you know, when I was coming up, you're probably too young for this, but there was a movie and a series of movies that had came out like in the early 2000s called Hostel. So like, you know, it was horror movies. So we didn't even, you know, feel like as young black people, our first introduction into hostels was people just getting their heads chopped off in these like European hostels.
Some hostile hostels. Huh?
So yeah, so when I get to Panama and I'm traveling and they're like saying a hostel, I'm like, oh no, that ain't gonna happen. I seen the movie. I remember watching the movie with my homeboys in the dorm. And fam, we were like, man, we ain't doing that. That ain't for us. That's for them. You see what happened when they go out there and do that though. So we were like, we ain't gonna do that. But it was so much that with that attitude, we weren't being able to take advantage of on like this budget travel and seeing things off the beaten path. And one of the things we really got into with Black Packers was with my homeboy Nigel, another black dude who moved to Panama with his income check, with his refund check. He came up with this idea called complexion protection, where we were able, as black people in spaces where there is a multiracial society like Panama, we could go into places and people wouldn't necessarily read us as outsider, read us as foreigner. So we would like get the Negro nod, you know, in like certain places that other people wouldn't get because they didn't associate us with foreigner. And we wanted to take advantage of that, but then we were also very critical, like, because also when people read us as black, local, native, or black person from the coast, that came with a lot of negative things too. We were being pulled off buses by law enforcement officials. We were being profiled, stereotyped because of what we embody. So it was important for us with Black Packers to talk about that entire experience. Like what are the quote unquote benefits of being able to move in a space where people look like you, but then what does that come with on the negative consequential side of being a black man in a country that thinks about black men the same way, that are very similar ways like here in the United States. So like what are you opening yourself up to, and how does that influence how you travel? And of course, like, we didn't like the idea of backpackers having to be dirty people, like long hair and having washed their, you know what I mean? So we were like, it's not one way to be. So that's what we were trying to do.
Yeah. And so you mentioned it. You were kind of inspired at a young age from your grandfather, right? And so I'm assuming entrepreneurship is something you've always been interested in. Did you have like a this is something I can do moment, or did you always have that belief that you can do it and you're just kind of waiting for what exactly that would look like?
I think it was more to the second part of what you said, that it just kind of, I'm not going to say it just happened, but it kind of did happen. And the reason it happened for me, I think the way that it did, and it might seem very non-linear, was because I moved to Panama. And then in Panama, it's not the United States, so I was seeing things completely differently. I was seeing how entrepreneurship lives at a local level, where people who don't have like startup money at all, or any access to really understanding startup, but have like always been entrepreneurs. And like my grandmother being one of them, like my Panamanian grandmother, who has always done hair out of her house, have always sold sweets and things on the road, has always, been hustling. Or in Panama they call it it's not a good word, by the way, but they call it bujonero or bujoneria. Those are people who sell things informally, but it's not they do work informally. It's the system that makes them, that forces them to have to enter into the marketplace like that. Right. So I seen the hustle of how these people was entering the marketplace, and I was like, well, I've always had this idea, and let me see if it works. Yeah. And it just came into like that. Mm-hmm.
And so in Panama, that's where Afrolatinx started, right? Mm-hmm. Along with your business partner, Dash, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So can you speak on that a little bit?
Yeah, of course. So Afrolatinx Travel, I began that with my business partner, co-founder Dash Harris Machado in Panama around circa 2015. I think the way that it worked itself out, I had ideas of doing Black-centered tourism in the area because of just like me living in Panama. Like Panama had become the destination for many of like my friends that were chilling, and just for my own personal interest, wanting to know more and like authentically connecting with people in Panama, learning a new language, learning how to be very conversant in Spanish. And then with that came talking with people. They were just sharing all type of information and histories with me that I know I wasn't able to find on my own without talking to actual people. And Dash had very similar ideas because she had produced like this documentary called Negro when she was in college as an undergraduate student, where she went to different countries, including the United States, and spoke to people about Black identity in Latin America. And we just kind of just meshed there, and it took off. Like, when people were visiting, they were like, we're going to go get Javier because he can tell you the history of every blade of grass, you feel me, in the field. And it was just me being me, and then somebody was like, you should put a price tag on it. I was like, okay, we can do that.
Yeah, I mean, of course.
And it took off. We put a price tag on it, people started buying.
Yeah. And so, okay, so whenever, kind of like what I alluded to at the beginning, right? I've always seen my future in both Panama and the United States. And I get that every country is different, right? Like, each diaspora group is different. But would you say that diaspora communities, at least here in the United States, or you could even make it more local to Texas if you want, would you say that diaspora communities are uniquely positioned to pursue successful ventures in multiple spaces? Would you say that?
I would definitely assert, I don't know if I would say it definitively, but I would assert that diaspora communities, wherever they are, because of it being a diaspora, share a certain connection with wherever they call home, or where they originate from, and wherever the place they are. And oftentimes, because of that inherent connection in these communities, I think it does present opportunities for them to be, and sometimes have to be, present in both places.
Yeah.
And many times, because of the inequities of the world and how trade is set up, how the global north is different from the global south, and when diaspora communities are spread between these different paradigms that exist in our stratified world, it then becomes something, I think, where we can add the business element, where sometimes you just you can access things at a way cheaper price than you can in your home country. And then because you have a connection to where you're home, your diaspora, I think sometimes it can lead you just to do that, to send remittances home, to send that. But then you also, some people can start seeing the larger economic benefits of it and the entrepreneurial side of it, and then move to it. So I don't want to say it's inherent that diaspora communities have to engage in business or things of nature, but I think because we are people and we are connected to the places that we are from and where we are, it presents opportunities for people to create a whole wealth of networks, including entrepreneurial business ventures.
Right. Yeah. And so, okay. And so, considering, like, you know, as you mentioned, there are inequities in the world, obviously, and you know, diaspora communities can be uniquely placed to pursue entrepreneurship in two different areas. And then thinking about the ventures that you are doing right now, would you consider yourself a social entrepreneur? And what does that term mean to you?
Most definitely the way that they're forcing me to think about social entrepreneurship, because I didn't know what that was until people were like, oh yeah, that's a social entrepreneur venture. And from what I understand, social entrepreneurship to be is just a business venture that has a focus on addressing social issues in XX locale.
Yeah.
And for me, in the work that I do and whatever entity that I've worked in or have created or starting or will create, has that element of thinking about the impact that it makes on the local environment and the local people. Speaking tourism specifically, it doesn't have to be only tourism, but what does that look like? And then also how to redirect some of those profits, revenues generated into that community. So I'll give you a couple examples. What does that look like? In Afrolatinx travel, we have an initiative called brown books and brown toys for black and brown books and toys for black and brown kids, where we have a lot of our guests come and help us address a social issue in Latin America. There is a dearth, that means like very little to nothing of positive representation of black Afro-descendant characters in children's literature or in the children's toy doll making industry in these countries. So what we try to do to address that issue, and we're not doing it on a large scale because we're not the government, but the little that we can do, we ask our guests, our participants, who mostly come from the United States, who are mostly black North Americans, could be African American, or from many different ethnicities in the United States, but are racially black in many cases, to bring those materials with them when they come. And what we do is redistribute them into the local populace for those young people. So we're addressing a social issue there, lack of representation. The people who we work with in Afrolatinx travel, including Black Austin Tours and Black Packers, is really being very strategic to think about our community partners, because within the travel industry, many times community partners are non-existent for large-scale operators. They're just trying to get the most bang for their buck when thinking about curating travel. But we're very intentional on who we work with and make sure that we redirect these dollars into the hands of community members who have the stories that we're actually exploiting, to give or to educate the populace that's coming. So many times, many of these people have never been trained in tourism or tour guiding, do not have the licensure to be official tour guides. That means they have not been brainwashed by the state to say a very specific history of the locale. But we allow them to tell their story, and we redirect those funds that we generate from our people that are traveling, our guests, into their hands. So we again think that's another way of addressing a social issue, which is very social, thinking about stratification at the local level. We don't even got to think about it globally, at the local level, of who has access to tourism dollars and such.
Yeah, and I think Javier brought up a great point there. I'm obviously coming from a technical background. I study aerospace engineering, and even in a technical venture, I find that, engineers, we automatically think about the products, and we don't think about oftentimes we don't think about the people that it'll impact. So Javier was obviously talking about tourism, but even if we're thinking about engineering, I'm sure some of you have heard me talk about people-centered engineering. That's something that I'm really passionate about. But I think it's really important that we think about the local community and local partners, even if you are part of that diaspora, right? So for me, I'm part of the Panamanian diaspora, and sometimes I can find myself assuming like, oh, I already know, I know this like local situation, right? But in reality, I don't. Like, I don't live there. And so I always have to remind myself to contact local partners, think about who has better knowledge on this than me, right? And so I just wanted to say that real quick, because I think Javier, like, that was a great example of how he's addressing that with Afrolatinx travel. And so just to wrap up, my last question is, and we could circle this back to Austin with Black Austin Tours, but what's your long-term vision, or what are your long-term goals for Black Austin Tours, or just some other ventures, anything?
Yeah, I'm here. I'm here now in the travel space. I never thought this would be an industry that I would really be in, but I love it, not only because the part of travel. I really love it because it's very educational. I think in my wholehearted opinion, in the United States, and I think even broadly, that outside of K through 12 education, I think a lot of people learn about different places through the travel industry, including when you go on field trips in K through 12.
That's
you all go to the capital, you go to this site. The stories that these individual tells are not only for ones of enjoyment, and oftentimes they are, but it starts to create a story around that city, that site, and those people that occupy that there. So for me going forward, I know that there is in Chiamanda, I can't pronounce her last name, but you can help me there. the Nigerian
Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie.
uh-huh
I love her. Great author.
if you just think about or read her or listen to her, the problem of the single story, the violence many times in the single story, and in understanding that one story is not the entire story, because you have a story, I have a story, that person, this community has a story. In many instances when it's related to black people or other marginalized groups, our stories have not been narrated in diverse ways. We have to fall into the narrative of the mainstream society. So going forward, I desire to continue to help narrating more diverse stories about different populations. In the work that I do, even in my scholarship, it is very diasporic. I love talking about historically black colleges in the United States and the connections that they made with black people in Latin America, Panama specifically, and how they created these diaspora networks that we don't really know too much about.
Yeah.
But obviously, before Twitter, before Facebook, before social media, they had some pretty intense communication where they were getting people to come here, and conversely, many African Americans were in the Republic of Panama. And I can give you many countless examples of many African Americans, both famous and regular people that were there in communication. So I want to continue telling diverse stories in the travel industry wherever the wind blows me, including here in Austin, continue to develop because there's a need, and other places. So through the mediums, not only in-person tours that I have learned how to kind of master, if you will, but also moving into the more digital spaces, podcasts, educational curriculum, different videos, working with different tourism boards to think about the historical connections between different places in the United States and beyond. So that's what I'm planning to do going forward, to just be more encompassing when thinking about how to narrate and capture travel on various platforms for the different people that are in movement.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, those are all the questions I had. Thank you, Javier, for speaking with me. Very interesting hearing your journey. Of course, I've heard a little bit about it previously, but I think people will really appreciate your transparency, and also, how you connected from when you were little all the way up until now, and what you see yourself doing in the future. If you want to give a shout out to any of your Instagram handles, whether it's Black Austin Tours or Afrolatinx Travel, you can. What is that?
Claro.
Is it at Black Austin Tours? Is that it? Yeah. I forgot the Afrolatinx one.
No, claro. Me gustaría invitarles a todos y todas y todes a seguirnos en nuestras líneas, nuestras redes sociales. Ustedes nos pueden seguir en @BlackAustinTours, @AfroLatinoTravel, @BlackPackers con un AS or AS at the end, not ERS, but AS, because we got to put some style on it. So you can come find us on all social media platforms, Instagram, Twitter, and the likes of websites at Black Austin Tours, at Afro-Latino Travel. We didn't have the X at the time that we started it, and at Black Packers with an AS, not the ERS. Put us on it, and you can find me on www.blackaustintours.com.